Good
Nate?
morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining into our show today. This is legally our legal issue of the day, and we'd like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in each week. Uh, this week we will have our full contingent of outstanding guests: Milton Grimes, the great trial lawyer from LA, Rodney King, John Sweeney, who exposed widespread corruption in the LA Sheriff Department, and of course, our great colleague, Vanita Banks, who's one of the top lawyers in America. We just so happy that she's returning from some family misfortune. But before we get started, um, we're now within a few days of the most important election of our lifetime. I like to take this opportunity to thank, by the end of the day, those 60 million folks, particularly that 57% that voted for Biden, uh, for getting out to vote early. Uh, we got to sprint to the finish. Every vote counts. So if you're listening to this broadcast today, I'd like for you to do one big favor for me. I want you to go out and call 10 of your neighbors to make sure that they voted, and then have them call 10 of their neighbors to make sure they voted. Vote early. Make sure everybody get their vote cast. It's very important. Our lives is dependent upon that. As we wake up today, uh, over 225 million Americans are now deceased because of COVID-19. We have a pandemic that our leader in the White House knew about 8 months ago, took no corrective action. Yet they continue to downplay it. And then yesterday, we had the highest number that I've seen. It was over 71,000 folks that contracted the virus. So this is a real problem. And so the only way that we could change the trajectory of our history, folks, is that we have to get out and vote. Having said that, we'll start off today with Attorney Banks. Attorney Banks, the first issue is that 63 million folks watched the presidential debate, and they muted the mics of the 45th president, and finally we got some meaningful dialogue. But one of the things that was stated by the current president, he said, I think, quote, that I've done more for African American than any president, maybe with the exception of Lincoln, but some people say otherwise. A shocking statement. And then he said that I'm the least racist person in the room, and I can't see up in the gallery. What were your thoughts about those statements?
Well, when you look at the debate, and my reflections on the debate are that while they were more civil, while this debate was more civil, the fact is that 1 in 1,000 African American people are diagnosed with COVID-19 and are 3 times more likely to die from COVID-19. And the majority of children who die from COVID-19 are African Americans. And so we're literally dying because of the lack of a comprehensive, uniform strategy with respect to COVID-19. We also know that President Truman, integrated the military, and that President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. But more importantly, it was civil rights activists that had stood up and advocated for major changes in the law, and that presidents demonstrate the leadership to help to facilitate that change. When we talk about the facts, over 90% of Black-owned businesses were denied funding through the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Plan, and currently 40% of Black-owned business have been closed during COVID-19. Under this administration, Black Americans continue to trail in unemployment, home ownership. The jobless rates continue to spike. There are significant disparities in across all important indicators from healthcare to jobs. The Brookings Institute recently reported that the net worth of white families is $171,000 and that of blacks is $17,150. So it is absolutely a false statement that the current administration has been the best with respect to African Americans. Absolutely a false statement.
Wow. Attorney Sweeney, our resident historian.
Yes, sir.
What was the historical context of this, starting back with Lincoln, that he says that he's now a greater president? What's your take on that?
It's absolutely not supported by the facts. It's a typical bluster of Donald Trump. You can't believe anything that comes out of his mouth. But first of all, Lyndon Johnson, let's keep Barack Obama out of it. I'll come back to him. But Lyndon Baines Johnson, president who took over after President Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, historically and factually did more for Black Americans than any other president, other than Barack Obama, and I'll come back to him. First of all, Abraham Lincoln was not a true abolitionist. Abraham Lincoln, his motivation was to preserve the Union. That is the reason why he chose the abolition of slavery, and that's eventually led to the Civil War. But he wanted to preserve the Union. That was his whole goal in his presidency vis-a-vis the chattel slavery. So his vice president, Andrew Johnson, was an avowed segregationist. And if Abraham Lincoln chose him as his vice president, he had to know his philosophy. Andrew Johnson, because Reconstruction was working too well, did more to bring back or set up the system of apartheid and set the stage for Plessy versus Ferguson than any president. He was impeached. He was saved by one vote in the Senate and from impeachment, and he instituted the Black codes down south. He had a horrible record on civil rights, and that's his actions led to 70 years of apartheid in America. Now, with what Lyndon Johnson did, now we know that John F. Kennedy was liberal and he wanted to change the country, which probably cost him his life. That's another story for another day. But he knew his vice president, and his vice president carried forth his vision of the new America. Under Lyndon Johnson, he passed the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, or got it passed. He got it passed the Voting Rights Act, and so he did a lot. By the way, 2 years ago, I was in Austin, Texas, and on the campus of the University of Texas is the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library. I'm a historian. I was a history major. I went there and I toured it, and I stayed there. I thought it was going to be an hour or two. I stayed there the whole day, and I read a story about a young girl growing up in Wisconsin, and she was a voracious reader. She loved to read, and her segregated or less than stellar elementary school or middle school principal recognized that this school probably wasn't the best school for her. So under the Operation Head Start program, which was founded by Lyndon Baines Johnson, she was allowed to go to a school that challenged her more, and she became a very great person. And she's now became, or is known to the world, Oprah Winfrey. She came out of that LBJ Operation Head Start program. I also read, and I'll stop talking after this, I also read a story about a young man growing up in the 5th Ward of Houston, Texas, the ghettos of Houston, Texas, who was a roughneck and always got into trouble, was headed straight for the penitentiary or the cemetery, one of the two. There was no in between for this guy. It was that bad. Well, he got put in the Job Corps program. The Job Corps was started by Lyndon Baines Johnson to help people just like this. And this person went along to become an Olympic gold medalist, heavyweight boxer, became known to the world as George Foreman. So these are great, great people who came out of these great programs started by Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, so if you want to set the record straight, LBJ did more for African Americans than anybody, including Abraham Lincoln. Now, one final thing. Barack Obama, there wasn't, I mean, he had to be the president for all people. He did a lot for Black people, but what he did for most for Black people is he became president. He was the example. People were crying and with disbelief, especially older African Americans that never thought they would see the day that an African American would be the president of the United States. He did everything by just being an example. With that, I set the record straight. Back to you, Mr. Lee.
Attorney Grimes.
Yes, as I said at the beginning, Nate, I wasn't able to see the debate Thursday, but in my imagination, that must be the only that President Trump stated in his debate, and everything else was truthful, like on coronavirus and his attack and his prevention of its spread and all of the other things that he's done to make America great again. Is that right?
Well, the problem with the coronavirus, that did come up and he was checked on that. The Vice President Biden told him in effect that he knew about it in January, that this was going to be a really horrible virus.
Milton was being facetious. Milton was being facetious. He was being facetious. He was being facetious. And he set the stage. He set the stage. Your discussion, he was your setup man, and you're the straight man, Nathaniel. And you say, absolutely not. But Milton was being a comedian. He was being.
Now let me finish, John. I didn't interrupt you. You're being like the president was in his first debate. That's why I didn't watch the second one. But anyway, it just shocks me that the statistics say, or the media says, that 17% of African American men, John and Nate, support Trump. And then I read recently that Ice Cube has jumped on the Trump bandwagon, but jumped off once he was challenged. So what is it about him, though, that does attract so many African American people? Is it his ability to lie and mislead and take on the Russian doctrine of, if you tell a lie enough times, half of the people will believe it? I think adopted that tactic, and it works for him.
Let me tell you, I can answer that question. I'm gonna go back to Nathaniel. You can come back to me if you want, but I can answer your question about what attracts African Americans to him. But go on, Nathaniel, it's your show.
Well, I'll go back to that in a second, but let me explain to you the crime bill that they keep talking about. Let's set the record straight. When the crime bill was originally passed, it had money set aside for counseling and treatment and all that. But then the Republican took over Congress and they changed it. But what most people don't realize, back in the 80s, we had some significant issues. I remember being in South Florida I had my sister who was murdered. The Colombian cartel bring in massive amount of drugs, and there was many 10 to 12 people would get shot and killed on the street once they lose drugs. It was just a terrible tragedy. I watched the movie Miami Vice, and so I went down to Miami as part of this murder investigation and went to Miami Vice and discovered there was nothing like the one I saw on TV, but what I heard was a story of really out of control violence perpetrated by these drug lords from these foreign countries. It was just a tragic situation. So most people don't realize that these laws were enacted because of an out of control situation involving criminals from foreign countries that came into our community. They imported these drugs, and there was mass murders. And so this was a reaction, but unfortunately, the bill got gutted once the Republican took over Congress, and we never saw the treatment components of the bill. And that's the part everybody forget about. So yeah, we had a lot of people go to jail, but the problem that is this, is that it was how the Congress altered that progress. Now, the other mistake they're making, I thought that was very significant, is that the Obama administration reduced the federal penitentiary by thousands of people, and they also commuted over 1,000 sentences. So they made a lot of progress. The difference between Obama and Trump is that Trump had pardoned his criminal friends, and then he throw in a few African Americans and do a big TV interview, and it looks great. And then they passed this prison reform, and what we've seen is that the way the Justice Department is enforcing that is not working out fairly for our community. So having said that, we'll talk to Attorney Sweeney.
Yeah. Let me make a quick correction because I looked it up while you were speaking. It was not the Head Start program that Oprah, it was the Upward Bound program, but it still came out of that Equal Opportunity Act of '64.
Absolutely.
Milton asked what attracts so many African Americans to Trump, and it's not a large, it's a small percentage, but historically there have been there's always been a small percentage of African Americans who seek to please the master, who seek to, during slavery time, to tell on and rat out the slaves who were learning to read, who were gathering for religious services, who were plotting against the master. There's always been that group of people. So, but it's a small group, and they're still African American. We don't agree with them, but I don't think it's going to be of much consequence in this election.
And I want to add, I want to just add to that, when we talk about African Americans, it's more accurate to say African American men, and I think the percentage that's being targeted in terms of swing vote are young African American men who are tired of being taken for granted, and some African American young men are not as loyal to the Democratic Party as their elders have been. And so I think that it's important for the Democratic Party to speak directly to this group of voters, to listen to this group, and to target this small but typically overlooked segment of the voting population, young Black men who, many of which will be voting for the first time in this election.
Okay, Emma, a producer, let's talk to one of our callers. Also, for the folks in Indianapolis and across the country, our number is 317-239-1310. 317-239-1310. Also, you can send us text messages through the Facebook and also Instagram. And so we will try to respond to some of those during the course of the show. Okay, producer.
Hey, how you doing, Brother Nate, and to the esteemed panel? We always love to hear from.
Hey, can you answer this one question for us, Ms. Imhotep,
Can you
real
hear me a little
quickly?
bit? Can you hear me?
Why are
Okay,
these
yes, how you
African-American
doing,
young
Nate?
men
Like to say
supporting
hello.
Trump?
Hello to our esteemed guest, your esteemed guest, and we always like hearing from our legal experts that definitely represent us in the community. A couple quick questions, and I'll go because I know it may be a little bit. Number one, what has been the ramification from the Flowers ruling when it comes to Bastian challenges? I don't know if I guess it dealt with the equal protection and due process clause of the 14th Amendment. But have you all heard anything? Has there been any significant change considering the George Floyd after the Breonna Taylor and Floyd protested with the Flowers case? I thought the Flowers case was very significant as far as African Americans and getting liberty and justice. And then number two, going back to, I think it may have been one of the attorneys talked about when you discussed the crime bill. There were a lot of black pastors that wanted that crime bill. Today, esteemed guests, in Indianapolis, there are a number of black pastors who do want a heavy-handed approach with law enforcement. There are some, I know for a fact, that do want stop and frisk. I've had that discussion with them. They do want it. Pastor James Jackson feels that law enforcement is basically, or having relationships with law enforcement, is basically the only way to try to stem this tide. I sent him 3 articles, one from a professor from the University of Chicago, talk about the socioeconomic and the psychological and social conditions of African Americans going back to the 50s and 60s when we were highlighting them. To that's going to be where you're going to get your dent in. But we still to this day have a large segment of black pastors who are getting that itch just like they had back in '94. So I'd like to hear your opinions about that, the Flowers decision, and then that itch of '94 reigning in, considering we see it here, considering we're having a high homicide rate. Thanks, Nate.
Well, in response to that, the Flowers case, he was referring to the man who had 6 trials in Mississippi for a murder he did not commit. It went to the Supreme Court. They set it aside and was set for retrial. And I think in September of 2020, after all these years and all these trials, they finally dropped the case. But what troubled me about the Flowers case more than anything else was the prosecutor. When I looked at the demographics in that county, it was majority African American in a lot of those counties. And I was wondering, how did he keep getting reelected? What he would do is that in each jury trial, he would exclude all African Americans from the panel. And so you had a system of injustice. We saw that recently in Breonna Taylor, this time by African American skin color, at least, Dan Cameron, who refused to present objective evidence to a grand jury. It was just shameful. So we have to work hard every day. And the most important thing that we could do as America is just keep voting. Now let's go back to the line and take the second call. Denise, you have a question for us today.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment first. It seems like to me that there shouldn't be a rational, intellectual reason that an African American man would represent or have a relationship with the thoughts of Donald Trump's ideas. Now, if Donald Trump did not, and the Republicans did not sign a bill that says it is a federal crime to hate a black man, why would a black man or black men agree with anything that Donald Trump has towards the black community? Yeah, I understand the statement that he made. He's done more for the black community other than Abraham Lincoln. And I believe he's associating it with Abraham Lincoln was a slave master. He owned slaves. And then his conscience was his guide. Okay, he freed the slaves. But Donald Trump is not the mental, intellectual person for the African American community. And I am astonished about regarding these black preachers who all of a sudden want to support someone who does not represent Jesus Christ. Yeah, he does not represent him. So I'm not understanding where the black men who are supposed to be the leaders of our community is deciding to get on board with someone during the voting time. They had 3.5 years to decide that he is not right for United States, period. But I just would like you guys to understand and consider this. If black men decide to support Trump, Omarosa made that decision, and look what happened to her. We need you guys to just stay honest, just be resilient, and to vote for Biden and Kamala Harris. We've already seen what Donald Trump does. We know he's a pathological liar. He's
Okay.
not a religious person.
Well, I agree.
Stay focused.
Well, thank you. What were you going to say,
Thank you.
Attorney Grimes?
I was going to say, I'm trying to push the envelope a little, and John, I think, answered the question accurately in saying it's a small percentage of African Americans. In my little personal survey around, it's discomforting to hear the few that do say Obama didn't do anything for Black people and Trump has done more, and that they support Trump. But it is, like John Sweeney said, just from my personal survey, a small percentage of people. And it is like back in the day with the House Negroes telling on us and sabotaging the freedom plans that we had and putting us back. But I hope that my observation is correct, and I hope that John is correct in that it is a small percentage. Donald Trump is pushing or has pushed quietly for implementation or activation of the death penalty in the federal system. They're executing a woman next month, and that he has jump-started and restarted the death penalty executions in the federal system. They haven't had an execution in 30 years, except this year, this summer, they started that death machine up again. And it's going to be a significant number of African Americans being executed in his drive to make the Republican Party think he's a law and order president at the end of his presidency. So in answering part of her question, that's my comment.
Okay, let's go
Could
back.
I
We
add-
have a bunch of callers, and we'll take a couple of these callers, then we'll come back. Okay, produce the next caller.
Hello?
Hello?
Am I on? Yes. I want someone to explain to me on Roe v. Wade, which was built on a hypothetical case. There was no rape in Roe v. Wade. How can they let it stand? It was based on a lie. The woman who played Roe, she died last year, and she saw a myriad of babies floating above her, and she admitted that she had been paid $96,000 to play the part of Roe. She was not raped. I'll listen for your answer.
Well, maybe someone else can comment on that, but I don't know that to be true. Does anyone on the panel know that to be true?
Well, I heard last year or read last year that the lady who was the plaintiff in that case for abortion was paid a certain amount of money. But the law still stands that women should have a right, sir, to decide what's done with their body. Problem we're having is we're going to have a Supreme Court that's going to more than likely be voting to take that right away. When I say voting, I mean deciding a case to take that right away from women, from people who want to decide what to do with their own body. So that's about as much as I can say about it.
Well, I know about the case. Go ahead, Attorney Banks.
Go ahead, I was just going to say that
the Supreme Court decision had nothing to do with rape. That's something that people threw into the mix. What it had to do with laws at the time that did not give women the decision to determine whether or not they want to get an abortion. Women were getting abortion, primarily Caucasian women. But so I know what he's talking about, and that's something that kind of distorted the purpose of what the ruling was all about. So the ruling didn't have to do with rape or anything like that. It just said that under the Constitution, that the women have the right to make a decision concerning their own body. And that's the gist of the decision, not the component of rape and other issues. Now, those type things have come into fruition, and then they've changed the narrative by going into the third trimester and things like that. But the bottom line is that when she filed that lawsuit, I think she was in the first trimester of the pregnancy. And so that was the decision that women do have the right to have an abortion. Now, there's been limitations, particularly in the third trimester, like in our state, for example. In the third trimester, I think at 32 weeks, somewhere in that neighborhood, we determined that that's a human being. But go ahead, Attorney Banks.
I was just going to say that Roe versus Wade, decided in 1973, the landmark decision was that women have a right to abort a pregnancy, and they talked in terms of trimesters, first, second, and third trimester, and that pre-viability, a woman has a right to an abortion without undue or the right to make the choice about having an abortion without undue interference from the state. Now, after viability into the second and third trimester, the state has a legitimate interest in protecting the woman's health and balancing that with the life of the fetus.
Now, the problem, though, is that, folks, that have absolutely nothing to do with you getting out the vote. Now, let's take the next caller.
Yeah, good afternoon to you and your panel. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
good morning.
Yeah,
What's
good
your
morning.
question or comment for us today, sir?
We can't take our focus. Like, there used to be a thing, don't take your eye off the prize. And the prize was the Supreme Court. They're getting ready to stack the court, the law of the land. We're so focused on Donald Trump and trying to get him out. Coronavirus will still be around if they successfully get him out of office. So, and politics are so local. We so focused on the national scene when we should actually be focusing on the state local scene, because those are the things that are going to get changed. The national is going to be what it is. It's national policy. But when it comes out to the local, we as African Americans fail to concentrate on the local politics, get caught up in the national politics, and once again, it's about power. The Republicans have gotten what they want. They could care less about. They'll sell Donald Trump out because the key is the Supreme Court, the rulers of the land. So,
hey, Carl, there's something you need to know that's very critical. Like this earlier caller is concerned about abortion, but let me tell you what the real problem is here that I have. Judge Amy Barrett was on the Seventh Circuit, and she co-authored an opinion that basically say black males who are tortured by a police officer and killed, there is no remedy. So in other words, she may be concerned about the unborn child, but not apparently concerned about black teenagers who were murdered by police officers. So I have a fundamental problem with that. And this is a real case called Wooten versus Day, where a kid was tortured here in Indianapolis, and the judge determined that you don't have a right to sue. And basically, we're letting people who commit crimes, who are police officers, get away with murder. And so I don't know why people are hung up on this abortion issue, but I tell you what, if you think that it's okay for this type of decision to stand, it is the worst decision since Plessy versus Ferguson. Basically, you're allowing people to torture teenage kids, and I don't think that's right.
But yeah, Nate, the caller was saying that Donald Trump's real damage to this country is appointing another Supreme Court justice that will be able to affect the country for 30 years. This Supreme Court is set up now to really do damage. I think that was the caller's main point that he was making, and he's absolutely right.
Yeah, he's correct.
He's absolutely correct. And we also know that this administration has appointed numerous conservative judges. Many of us, or most of us, will never have a case that will go up to the Supreme Court, but most of us will be impacted by these conservative judges. That's why it's very important to understand who's on the judicial ballot in your state, and the appointment of these conservative judges are going to negatively impact judicial outcomes for African Americans and people of color on healthcare issues, racial equality, law enforcement, and so many other issues. And so when we're considering our vote, we must also consider those judges that are on the ballot in our jurisdiction.
Okay, producer, next caller.
Hello?
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah.
What's your question or comment for legal issue of today?
Yeah, just a statement I want to make.
Go ahead.
Oh, the lady was saying about black preachers. I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. A whole lot of folks don't support Donald Trump. But I think it's about the gays and the lesbians and different things like that. And back in the day, they didn't care nothing about the black folks, just whatever they could get out of them. So most folks, whatever they can get out of Trump, that's what they're trying to get. They care nothing about it. But it's all about the men's marrying the men, the women's marrying the women's, according to Romans chapter 1. That's my point of view for today. Thanks for taking my call.
Nate, can I comment on something Vanita?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Vanita raised a point that is of concern to me because a friend of mine is calling me this afternoon to ask for a review of the judges that are running in LA County. And I'm saying, okay, I know a couple of them, but I realize it's I'm deficient. I don't know about you, John Sweeney, but I'm deficient in knowing the judges, for the majority of them, that's running for office. So I can imagine the public is more deficient than I am in knowing about the judges because they are ex or former prosecutors. As far as the incumbent, you can get some information on, but how do we go about helping the public be educated about judges that are running for office?
Well, in Indianapolis, for example, our judges only can run for a retention vote now, unlike the other counties who can run as Democrat, Republican. Our judges, because our county is now Democrat, Republican took away the right to have open competitive judgeships. And so now they run just for retention vote, and 2/3 of folks vote yes for retention that have absolutely no knowledge of the judge's ability. But we're very fortunate. We have some outstanding judges on the ballot. You know, we have Marcel Pratt, Cynthia Harris, a bunch of outstanding judges. But I think our system is unfair in terms of how we engage in the process as compared to the other counties in Indiana. If you want to have so-called merit selection, it should be the same in counties that have Republicans also. In our county, because we're all Democrat, about 7%, our governors select our judges, which I think is not a fair system unless you do it equal all across the state. But what was the other issue that Attorney Bank raised?
Well, the issue regarding judicial appointments and informing the public regarding the judges that are on the ballot, either process being for retention or elected, many bar associations, including here in Chicago, the Cook County Bar Association, they review and publish a list of judges, and they're ranked as qualified, highly qualified, or not qualified. So I always ensure and disseminate to my friends and colleagues that list that they can not literally take into the polling place with them, but review it prior to arriving at the polling place so that they can have recommendations for judges that are in their local communities and on the ballots.
Does Langston pull out that list, John? You know? Does Langston Bar put out that list?
No, not that I'm aware of. And I'm with you, Milton, that when I see these judges on the ballot, and I've been practicing law for 40 years, I know most, I don't know most of these people, or
Right.
I'd say 95% of them I don't know, you know, because they're ex-prosecutors and, you know, they have no real public record on their stance on issues. And, you know, it's a very, very unscientific way, or not a prudent way to get a judge elected by just putting a name on a ballot and there's no information about that person. Even you go on their website, of course, there's going to be some self-aggrandizing things said, but anyway, I don't agree with I'm with you, Milton. It's a dangerous way to select a judge.
They're taking Trump's lead. I'm the greatest lawyer for Black people since Johnny Cochran, and who can disprove that in the time you have? I mean, it's a stab in the dark, an uneducated guess that we're doing.
And many times there's not a choice, and you see just one name on the ballot, and that's it. And so the races are not even competitive.
Yeah, so we need to
from a policy perspective.
We need to change that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take one caller. Caller, you have a question for us today?
Yeah, you know what we have here in Indianapolis is we have de facto judges because they changed the system only in areas where there's a large populations of blacks. Well, what a de facto judge can do, anything that his mission incurs to him, and he's going to be able to rule on federal statutes and anything he wants to do, because basically he's ruling on contracts of plea bargains. But when it comes to federal statutes, they have an emphasis now in our town to collect people that have been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence since 1987 when it came into effect. Now, a lot of men are walking around town that don't know this, and there's no information campaign. But what's going to happen is you're going to find yourself out with a firearm in your home or in your car, and that's when you go before these judges, these de facto judges. You're going to have to do 5 years in prison, and there's going to be no way out for you, because federal time is the full amount of time that you're going to serve. So I think there ought to be some kind of ad campaign to apprise these fellows who have been convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence. And if they get caught with a gun anywhere in their vicinity, they are going straight to jail for 5 years. So they're building a new big jail here in town, and they got to fill it up. And I think they're going to mix these de facto judges, because they can rule on anything. You know, I read about them. They have a problem here with the black population, and that's how they're going to get rid of them and make money on them. All the people who have disability, they're going to collect them. They're going to take their checks. They're going to sell them whatever dope they can, and when they get them in there, and it's just going to happen. So I think we need to just have an education campaign for men who have straightened their lives out and are doing right and getting caught in the vicinity of a gun, and the judge is going to say, I don't have any leeway, you got to get 5 years. That's how they package them. Thank you.
Okay, let me point some out so I could correct something that the caller just said. in Marion County, we have about 40 Superior Court judges and a Circuit Court judge. And in addition, we have magistrate. Up until a few years ago, judges were selected to 6-year terms. And then I think Public Law 319 changed that, where we have a panel now that approves certain judges. They send in the process to the governor to approve the governor for new judgeship. The current judges simply stand for retention votes. And so on our ballot this time around, there's probably about 20 judges who, including the Supreme Court Judge Jeffrey Slaughter, who's an outstanding Supreme Court judge, and we have a Court of Appeal judge and Superior Court judges, and they're up for retention vote. There's no difference in legal authority between these judges that are up for retention vote versus the judges that are appointed by the governor. Every judge have the same legal authority in our system of justice. We have a unified court system. And so now the third component of it, the caller was right. We will be moving at some point. I talked to the judge. We're looking at March of 2022 into a new facilities on the southeast side of Indianapolis. And they do have a larger jail. And so, but fortunately, we have an outstanding local prosecutor, Ryan Mears, who I think is doing an incredible job. The thing that he did has been extraordinary. Like, he dropped charges for the misdemeanor cases. He allowed for early expungement for people with minor drug offenses and things like that. And so even during the riots and protests here in Indianapolis, he dropped charges against about 50 folks right away. So what I'm saying is, our local justice system, in terms of courts, is a good system. You know, we don't have a system whereby, like in some of the contiguous counties, maybe you don't have that, but here, about a third of our judges are African Americans, and so our system locally, for the most part, is a fair system. I don't offer any criticism, except for the fact, I might say this: justice is based upon wealth a lot of times. So a tremendous amount of our citizens rely on public defender representation. I'm not satisfied with that type of representation, quite frankly, but you know, that's the system we have. Okay, Attorney Banks, you had a comment?
No, not on that specific point.
Okay, we'll go back to the line. Antonio, you have a question for us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. Right now I have a show that comes on the same station, Black Power Presents. I'd like to invite you on if you ever had time. But yeah, my question is, I have a reentry program primarily focusing on our targeted population is African Americans, and primarily anybody who's coming out of in Marion County. We have over 170 students that we're teaching virtually a construction core and helping them get jobs and training and all that sort of thing on release. But when we get some of these guys who get sentenced over to like places like Ball and whatnot, we got a problem with them kind of like playing games and not really allowing the people to participate, intimidate them so that they won't be able to finish our course. So is there a possibility that maybe I can work with you and the judges to help build this a part of their order so that, because these guys need education and they need training and they, need jobs to help get their family back together. So is there a possibility maybe we can work together?
Well, what you could do, leave your number with the producer, and then I could have maybe set up a meeting with the prosecutor and the judge's administrative office. I mean, anything to improve the plight of folks in our community, I'm all for it. I think that we have a system where so many of our young African-American men are part of the criminal justice process. And we have to fix that. We have to work every day. And also, I'm not happy with the glaring amount of homicides we've had in the city, about 190. And I think that's too many lives that we've lost. And so we have to work to improve that. We have to work harder as citizens to get along and try to avoid this violent trend that we're experiencing now in our city.
Nate, can I
have a follow-up?
Yes.
Follow-up question real quick. well, I just want to ask you, how do we deal? Because I just feel like there is a direct attempt of intimidation when it comes to certain guys like in Duval, and their situation to where it seems like it's a lot of manipulation and control with these guys' future. How can we get with these judges so that we can help some of these African Americans go to safer places? And then I'll take the answer off the air. Thank you for your time.
Okay, go ahead, Attorney Sweeney. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I will answer the gentleman's question later. If I may, get this back to the topic of the day, that is voting. Let me ask you, Nate. All goes well on election day for Democrats, and Biden and Harris are elected. And does the Democratic Party have a plan if Trump does not want to leave?
Yes, in essence, on each of the issues, there's probably hundreds of lawsuits filed all over the country by the Trump administration to do widespread voter suppression. And you've been reading about some of the lawsuits, but in anticipation of this, the Democrats started working with a cadre of lawyers early on to deal with various issues. Our best case scenario is that where we're headed right now is that early voting, the Democrats are getting 57.9% of the early vote, right? And so, and therefore, we're, as of today, we're up to like 60 million. So we have a lead now in the early voting, but we have to keep pushing vote every day.
Yes.
See, we had to get our vote total. Last time, there was probably 129 million folks that voted. This time, look like it could be about 140, maybe even 150 if the votes continue to come in. If that occurs, then we should have a resounding victory. If people continue to vote and call your neighbors, call your friend, we have to sprint to the finish. Now, if that were to occur, our system of accountability would have him remove. What he's attempted to do, they're trying to pack the court with Barrett, so they have 6-3 majority. So we know what happened. It wasn't the voting population that decided the Bush versus Gore. It was a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court to determine who the president was. And a lot of people may have forgotten that. We saw widespread voter suppression in Florida, and Bush won by 500 and some odd votes, but he really didn't. When we looked at the amount of ballots that were thrown out in the widespread voter suppression in Broward County, over 10,000 votes were suppressed. So there is progress in place. We had a phone call about this last night in part, and they're pretty confident that he would be removed if he didn't want to go. Because, see, the military, our U.S. military, we're not a dictatorship, although the president attempted to make them a dictatorship. And in fact, what happens is that our military are trained to follow lawful orders. And so our military would never follow an illegal act by this president. You know, they rebuked him a couple of times when he tried to do certain things, if you notice.
Yeah.
You had a question, Attorney Grimes?
Yeah, you answered it. I thought you were not going to answer John's question about, do you have a plan if he says, I'm not going because it was an invalid election or vote, so I'm staying in the White House. Is there a plan to evict him, Nate?
There is.
There is.
What I was just articulated is that, remember a good example of this, our democracy, even though it's been tattered, we still have a democracy that's in place. And what is the pillar of our democracy is the military. Have you noticed all these generals, they all turned on Trump, the retired general. We had the guy who headed up the Navy SEALs. So military men after military men are all saying that this is a lawless president. And so what should occur is that the transition of power would be peaceful in our country. Although we've seen a proliferation of these white supremacists. who's showing up at voting polls and things like that, which obviously I think is illegal what they're doing, they're trying to do. So hopefully law enforcement protect her. One final comment before we close out today, ladies and gentlemen, starting with Attorney Banks.
Your comments, Attorney Lee, make clear that every vote matters. And another large example is that when you look at 2016 and you look at several battleground states, in Michigan, for example, about 10,000 votes determined that election. In Pennsylvania, it's approximately 40,000 votes. Wisconsin, 20,000 votes. And so, as Attorney Lee stated, this has to be a fight to the finish. And we must ensure, and based on the early vote count, which is a third of the total vote count in 2016, we have to ensure that this election is won by a landslide, so there won't be any question regarding the peaceful transfer of power, which is which distinguishes the United States and is a critical cornerstone of our democracy. And I pray that this peaceful transfer will occur.
Attorney Sweeney?
Yes. Resist voter suppression. There are going to be attempts. There have been Russian-based emails threatening people that the Proud Boys are coming after you if you unless you vote for Trump. Resist that. Those are all threats. It's all a bunch of malarkey, as Biden says. Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. Because if this guy is in for 4 more years, this white supremacy that you've seen in the first 4 years is child's play. There's going to be a lot of African Americans losing their lives, going to prison over his proposed stop and frisk policies and other policies, social policies. And let me just leave you with one thing. An old track and field expression by the coaches is run through the tape. Even though you have the race won, make sure that you run all the way to the finish line through the tape. And so I leave the listeners and the viewers with that expression: run through the tape. No matter what the polls say, just keep going, keep voting. And like you said, encourage people, call 10 people, they'll call 10 people, run through the tape.
Attorney Grimes, very quickly.
Real quickly, I have this vision of Scarface when he's there fighting to keep people from taking him out of the house with Trump. Anyway, my hat is off to what you have done there in Marion. I praise your efforts and your success with the prosecutor you have there in Marion County with the team, and I use him as an example to people on what a prosecutor can do as far as protecting the public. Next, I would like to comment, please get out to vote, because you say 57% of the early voters' votes are for the Democratic Party. A ballot box was burned here in LA County last week. So this voter suppression is no joke. They're doing everything they can to suppress our vote. So please get out to vote.
Well, thank you for listening today. Thank you all your callers. Please join us each week, and also follow us on Facebook, and we'll also be on Instagram. Thank you, and make sure you get out and vote. Call your neighbors, call your friend. Vote. Your life depends on it. Thank you.
Run through the tape.
Run through the tape. That's right.